So there, without any further ado, I am very pleased to have this first panel here, The Sharing Economy, Women and Girls and Their Ties and Tensions, with Erin McDonald from Women's World Banking as our moderator and discussant. Erin has expertise in research evaluation and policy leadership across intersecting fields, including social justice, women's issues, economic security, and poverty alleviation. She has a PhD in public health and research from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, a master's in public policy and evaluation from Johns Hopkins Policy Studies Institute, and is a trained bioethicist. And we're very pleased that Erin could be here today to moderate this panel. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. All right, here we go. So I have the distinct honor of being with three of many incredible folks in the room this morning, and it's always a little funny to hear about yourself from someone else when they kind of lead off. But so the thing that I want to offer, and one of the reasons, one of many, I was so excited to be part of the conversation this morning, is that I have the honor of being the director of research at Women's World Banking, and the organization is about 40 years old, and we are a global nonprofit. So the thing that's really interesting is that we also sit at the juncture of a lot of the tension and ties that women experience around financial inclusion. And the organization works with many partners in many of the countries that you all are from. So we work with currently 40 institutions from in 29 countries, and have the opportunity to really think with partners in those spaces about how to create dynamic and interesting approaches that allow women, girls and their families to access resources around financial tools and education. So that, I would say, only to kind of segue in to introduce everyone here who's really looking at those questions in many different spaces. So I'm going to quickly run down who I have the honor of being with this morning, and then I'm going to ask that we start to go through. So first we have Carol Chan, and Carol is looking at To Sender to Carry, Gendered Evaluations of Formal and Informal Remittance Practices in Migrant-Origin Villages in Central Java, Indonesia. Then we have Sibel Kusimba, who is looking at group versus individual strategies, dynamic social networks of mobile money among unbanked women in Western Kenya. And finally, we have Jude Kenechi, Onyima. And Jude is looking at generational tensions in the uptake of digital financial services among adolescent girls and adults in Nigeria. Okay. So, Carol, I'm going to ask you to start. Yeah. Do you want to sit or do you want to stand?
Fine. I think I will try to do this. Okay, can everyone hear me? Good? All right, great. Oh, whoops. What's that? Okay. Sorry. Okay, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Carol, and today I'm going to be talking about migrants and their money, specifically from the perspectives of migrant-origin villages in Central Java. So that's where many migrants come from. I'm going to be talking about the meanings of migrant money there, and in general, just a summary, I found that the presence or absence of migrant money or cash is not necessarily an indicator of whether or not a migrant is perceived as successful. Instead, whether or not a migrant is perceived as successful is based on how villagers perceive how they use and earn their money in culturally appropriate ways. So just some background about the field. Migrant money is important to Indonesia. Indonesia received $8.5 billion from 6 million temporary labor migrants. So by temporary, I mean that in many of the countries where they work, such as wealthier Middle Eastern countries or East Asia and Southeast Asian countries, the possibility of them getting permanent residency or citizenship is almost impossible. So most of them embark on 2 or 3 year contracts before going back. So migration can be a poverty alleviating national economic strategy because of the huge amount of money that they send and bring home. And in Indonesia, they've also been called foreign exchange heroes. And yet, a lot of them do gendered and precarious labor. which is mostly informal with minimal pay and long hours and harsh working and living conditions. So women are usually domestic workers who live and work with their employer's household. They also do factory work, while men typically do construction, plantation, or manufacturing work as well. So it is this paradox, my interest in this project came from this paradox, where on the one hand, migrant remittances can significantly improve access to healthcare, education, and housing for migrants and their families. And yet, on the other hand, the financial and physical risks of labor migration has been really well documented. So fraud and extortion may occur to migrants even before they leave the country, when they may mortgage their households and pay recruitment agents a lot of money, and then only for the recruitment agents to run away with it. They may also be extorted by doctors or teachers in order for migrants to obtain their compulsory medical or language certificates in order to migrate legally. While working overseas, migrants also face underpayment or non-payment from their employers. And when they return as well, even if they have completed everything, migrants often carry cash home, and so they may also face robberies or extortion by immigration and customs officers and bus drivers from the airport until they reach home. So these are the many risks they face and the many perpetrators that are included. So in order to address these risks, which are mainly tied to the fact that migrants carry money and carry cash as well as valuables home with them, Indonesian state institutions, NGOs, as well as banks have started to facilitate financial education programs in many migrant-origin villagers. So these are aimed at prospective and former migrants and their kin. These often include entrepreneurship training programs such as cooking or sewing skills, as long as tips and guidelines on how to run a business and save. And these are also coupled with anti-trafficking courses aimed at educating migrants and their families about documented migration procedures. And these encourage digital remittance transfers, formal financial loans, and digital money storage. So this is just an example of a book that was published by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It says the title is 99 Tips to be a Successful Migrant. And as you can see, it's gendered. It focuses a lot on telling women what to do with their money, although about 40% of migrants are men. And you can see the woman, she's carrying a passport as well as a MacBook and a shovel and all these things. So the first, these are some examples. The first page basically says, do not bring a lot of cash back to Indonesia in order to prevent robbery, theft, and being conned. And the second basically tells migrants to send money home through formal institutions such as banks and post offices, and send it to someone at home that you trust. So despite the well-documented risks of carrying money home, as well as the fact that these training programs exist and financial education programs exist in many migrant-origin villages, in 2014, when I conducted preliminary research in Cilacap and Yogyakarta, I found that villagers appear to evaluate migrants' journeys as successful or not based on how much cash they physically carry back. So they would say, well, she's successful, why? Because she brought a lot of money back. He failed because he didn't bring much, or he didn't bring any. So one of my many research questions was to verify this. Do migrants and their kin privilege carrying rather than sending money home? And if they do, why? Why was this so? So scholars have tended to explain migrants' risk-taking in terms of desperation, poverty, greed, ignorance, and lack of relevant information. But I agree with the observation that many training and awareness-raising campaigns assume that knowledge changes what people do. But without transforming the material conditions in which people live and without understanding the cultural context of knowledge and action, these practices may continue to fail. So my project looks at how migrants, their kin, and neighbors approach and share knowledge and risk about migration and finance in culturally specific ways. So before I go into what I found, this is kind of a cultural background to it. So migrant in Central Java is a religious and moral issue. I found that sending or carrying money or building houses when migrants return are not objectively good acts in themselves or indicators of migrant success. Instead, migrants are evaluated in terms of how these actions, sending or carrying money or building houses, imply that they are good Javanese and Muslim men and women, particularly in relation to their family roles and obligations as husbands, wives, sisters, brothers, daughters, and sons. And so, for example, who do you send money to, especially when you're married or not married, and how do you negotiate sending money to your spouse and to your children or to your elderly parents? So how migrants are evaluated depends on how they answer and address these tensions. How often do they send it to, how often do they send it home, how much, as well as building houses. Who do they build it for? Where do they build it? And these context is important. And in addition to that, sending, carrying money, building houses, migrants are also evaluated in terms of how they behave. So even if you fulfill these objective indicators, they're still evaluated as successful or not based on how pious they are, how they dress, how they treat their family members as well as neighbors. And these are very gendered. These ideas are supported by institutionalized discourses, including through financial programs that I attended. So these entrepreneurship programs may emphasize the gendered and moral aspects of business, investments, and consumption. So for example, women were mainly addressed and seen as wives and mothers who have to put their families' necessities, important, put their family before themselves. They have to be frugal, and that women's income is usually seen as supplementary to their husbands, regardless of whether or not they earn more than their husbands or not. And this idea that the man is a breadwinner and the wife's places in the household and only to support her husband is written into the marriage law, the constitutional marriage law in Indonesia. And it permeates through a lot of discussions about money and work in gendered ways. So money has to be earned also and spent in fair and moral ways that they refer to as halal or religiously permitted. And so one last example on this is from an article from a magazine published by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It says, in order to be a successful migrant, don't just look for money. Instead, money is a gift from God. They call it rezeki. And to be successful, one should look for God, avoid gendered vice and sin. So that's what I mean by how you spend and use money, and share wealth with family and neighbors. So let's go back to the question, how do migrants and their non-migrant kin view sending and carrying money? So based on participant observation, group interviews, semi-structured individual interviews, as well as anonymous online surveys administered to migrants who are currently working abroad, I found that migrants generally felt they should send at least $200 or half their monthly salary to their families. The most said he sent $1,000, but that's very, very rare. But they should also at the same time save the rest to carry home. So a lot of them said that they should not send all their money home. Men and women, migrant men and women both said that family expectations were gendered. Migrants themselves and their families expected and perceived that men would send more money because men are more responsible, they earn more, and they're perceived as less flirtatious or rebellious. Although this is not true because gendered wages vary widely, and I know and have met a lot of women who live and work in Taiwan who work in factories, who earn and send much more than what a male plantation worker could in Malaysia. But nevertheless, this is the prevailing perception. Almost all migrants regularly sent money through formal or licensed remittance services, so banks, Western Union, and they cited that safety, convenience, and speed were factors. So migrants do send money home. And yet they also carried large amounts of cash back, between $1,000 to $5,000 US, and that is a lot. That's the equivalent to a year or 2 years worth of annual income for a factory worker within Indonesia who might earn 100 a month. So sometimes they brought this back in foreign currency, but not always. So a lot of people brought cash back. About a third of them chose just to carry just enough money for the road home and transfer the remaining savings. So only a third were more wary of the risks of carrying cash home. And amongst these, I found that men were explicitly wary of the dangers of carrying cash. So men would say, I would just carry enough money home because it was dangerous. There are all these, bad people around. But women didn't really specify that. And instead, women told me they felt it was safe compared to 90s and earlier. And this is really interesting because women are often targeted because they're seen as more vulnerable, especially if they travel alone. So they're more targeted for robberies. So this is interesting that women would downplay these risks. So just to summarize migrants' views, they did not seem to privilege carrying rather than sending money home. Instead, they did both and juggled both. But there's a gendered aspect in terms of risk perception. What about non-migrant villagers? So in general, they perceive that migrants who do not bring or carry cash home were failures, even if they had been sending money home regularly. So I have met many villagers who would give me examples of who was failures, even if that person had regularly sent money home to pay for her father's operation, for her brother's school fees. That was not enough. She didn't bring cash home, she didn't succeed. But there was a gendered part to this. So when we're speaking generally, migrants who didn't bring money home were failures. But when we talked about women specifically, they were accused of adultery, selfishness, and lack of filial piety. Women were more harshly judged for not bringing money home. So, for example, people would say, well, I bet she didn't bring money home because she was busy partying, she had foreign boyfriends abroad, she's spending money on makeup and clothes and unnecessary luxurious things. On the other hand, when men didn't bring money home, they were often excused. Oh, men have to spend money on cigarettes, it's expensive. Sometimes they have to buy energy drinks because they work hard. They need to pay for lodging and food that presumably women do not because they work in households, right? So this is also linked to the fact that men's wealth is taken for granted. So if men earn money, good for them, of course they do earn a lot. And yet when women brought money home, it was also suspicious. So no matter what women did, if they brought money home or if they did not, they still had to defend their moral reputation. So, for example, if a woman earned a lot, and most women do in Taiwan, there would be a lot of gossip. Well, did she earn it through pure means? Maybe she did sex work on the side, who knows? So, but despite the harsh judgment by non-migrant villagers on whether or not migrants brought money home, I found that they seldom knew much about the processes of sending, carrying, or receiving money. So when I pressed them for specifics, most of them said, well, I don't really know how they do it, or where they hide their money, or how often they send the money. They would say, no, kurang tahu, I'm not very sure. So I proposed that villagers' talk of carrying money does not literally refer to whether migrants physically carry cash. They don't really know. They don't actually see that cash. Instead, it refers to how money is spent or used upon migrants' return. So non-migrants don't actually see foreign currency. It's not culturally appropriate to show your $1,000 and wave it in the air to everyone. But they see what money does or buys. So in a way, there's a kind of paradox here, but in a way, success is easily measured and visible. So when migrants come back, it's clear they had savings in order when they come back and immediately start building houses, buying land, opening shops, or even buying nice clothes or buying a car or motorbike. So the effects of migrant money is seen easily and quickly in these ways. And migrants cited rising land prices for why they would spend their money immediately rather than saving it, the unstable Indonesian rupiah as well, if they brought back rupiah. So they felt that investing in these material things was less risky than saving. This, especially the issue of rising land prices because of migration, is really, really important. And it affects everyone, not just migrants. So non-migrants see these material consequences when migrants return home. So villagers also importantly keep track of which houses were funded by which foreign currency. So this, for example, was funded by Hong Kong dollars. And when my friends would take me on walks around neighborhoods, they would say, that's a Japanese house, that's a Korean house, that's from Saudi, that's from Singapore. And I was always amazed at how they knew, because the houses look alike. There's not a specific style to them, but they remember which migrants are from where and who built these houses. So they also kept track of whether migrants partially or completely funded the building of these houses. And if a family had 2 migrants, how much either sibling contributed was also the object of gossip, discussion, and judgment. So in contrast to the materiality of what migrant money can buy, the absence of migrant money is often, well, obviously less visible, and the reasons for not having or not bringing money is more unverifiable. So the typical reasons would be adultery, laziness, bad luck, divine retribution. But just to emphasize the gendered point again, even if women came back with lots of money and built a nice house, they would still have to fend off gossip that the money didn't come from socially acceptable ways, like through hard work. Whereas men who return without money, some may be shamed, but most likely they're also excused for not being able to build houses. And in addition, women have to face accusations of being bad mothers and wives, so they're kind of defying the gendered order by leaving. So in conclusion, did migrants and their non-migrant kin privilege carrying rather than sending money home? The simple answer is no. Carrying money is a way to talk about and evaluate migrants' financial behavior. Migrants and their fellow non-migrant villagers expected that migrants would send money regularly, but yet also save. So both are equally important. And it is how migrants manage their own spending in relation to their families' financial and moral expectations that is key here, I think. So it's linked to talking about migrants' money is a way of evaluating migrants' individual discipline, not only their financial discipline, but gender and moral disciplines, especially for women when they travel abroad. But fulfilling these expectations is actually extremely difficult. And in fact, I have not met a single migrant who can be said to be completely successful. There's always a but. In light of high costs of migration, risk of underpayment or non-payment by employers, and all the reasons I've mentioned before. So carrying money is a way to discuss and comment on gender tensions and the material consequences of migration. I found that migrant women face higher moral and financial risks. So in conclusion, further research will explore how these financial and moral risks are linked in gender ways from migrants. There are also differences in terms of how migrant men and women fund their journeys. Unfortunately, I do not have time to talk about that, but we can discuss that later. But I'm still working out specifically how these women's downplaying of risks relate to their higher moral risks or risks of being judged as failures. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank IMTFI for supporting our project on behalf of my team, whose names have disappeared. There. Okay. Kenya has been called the epicenter of the mobile money revolution. According to World Bank statistics, it is a remarkably successful service. It has become well known as a means through which urban workers can send money home to friends and family, as depicted in this famous ad campaign, which began in 2007. In our first IMTFI project, we used a network approach to examine how mobile money remittances are sent and circulated amongst friends and family. For example, Edward is an 85-year-old farmer with 10 children. In 2013, when this picture was taken, he was fostering 2 of his grandchildren at his rural home. In his network sociogram, which you can see on the left, he receives remittances from several of his children, shown in the graph in green. In turn, he sends and recirculates money on to his siblings, who are pictured in red. We drew network graphs for 14 families and documented the importance of siblings and mothers in money sending graphs. The social network analysis showed the roles people played in networks as central nodes, for example, those with more connections, who are depicted in these graphs as larger size, and as brokers who move resources from one more tightly connected group to another. The graphs did not incorporate time. I noticed in revisiting families in subsequent field projects that networks were dynamic and they were changing over time. I wanted to find a way to show the change over time in these networks. I also, in this first study, viewed the money sending in its social dimension as a way of creating relationships. I didn't ask people how much money they sent to others, and therefore I didn't really deal adequately with the economic dimension of money. I wanted to address both of these missing dimensions and to set the network in motion by drawing the social network at regular intervals over time. In this hypothetical drawing, the social network centered on a particular individual can change in different ways. For example, in the top row, the individual has a more stable network, sending and receiving to the same partners over time, whereas in the bottom row, the individual has a network that changes over time. So I wanted to look at these patterns. My inspiration in terms of method is the financial diary. Creating a financial diary involves returning to households at intervals to collect data and using questionnaires and observations to record household cash flows, money sources, spending and saving patterns, and financial instruments that are used. The aim of financial diaries is to understand and show a diverse range of financial tools and instruments that people are already using as a basis for showing where new products or services could support existing needs. Just to talk a little bit more about the dimensions of financial diaries tend to focus on currency money and sometimes crops and other in-kind exchanges. As Daryl Collins, who developed this method, has written, because our story is focused on how poor people manage money, we focused our discussion only on those transactions where cash is involved. Survey methods in financial diaries generally sample a household. The surveys measure income, expenses, and debt over time and create a balance sheet of assets and liabilities over time. Sometimes they also measure the financial net worth, as it's called, as a household. Financial diaries often avoid engaging with a subject on his or her own ideas or logics about money. They seek to understand money habits that people surveyed may not be aware of. Financial diaries also seek detailed data. Words like fine-grained, nitty-gritty, finely grained, and granular are often used to describe the data gleaned through household surveys. To quote Daryl Collins again, they look to record fine detail about crops, how people brought bread every day for a small amount, fine cash flow data to triangulate our picture of what low-income people need. Finally, financial diaries seek to reveal patterns in the economy of households. For example, do they build a positive balance over time? Are they meeting needs of household members and small business expenses? How do they respond to seasonal events and shocks? In 2014, I used a modified financial diary method to collect information on households who were participating in a maturity ceremony for adolescent boys. I encountered many questions as I attempted to collect household data. First, people made important investments and changes in their non-cash assets, which I felt that I needed to include. So to go beyond just currency money seemed to me to be very important in order to capture this financial dimension of households. Second, it was very difficult to distinguish households as separate economic units. Social relationships and credit debt relationships enmeshed many families and groups into networks based on mobile money sending, savings groups, and so on. Furthermore, many men supported multiple households or had secret families. Child fostering and visiting was very common. So I really had trouble seeing the household as a separate unit in this particular area. Finally, people seem to invest heavily in these social networks. In terms of trying to view something like a balance sheet of assets and liabilities over time, it seemed to me that financial well-being was important for many of the people that I worked with, but largely as it connected to helping their loved ones meet or achieve goals. A purely economic view of success seemed to miss much of what was important to them. Most described their social relationships as the most important part of their lives. So I felt I wanted to pursue the financial diaries, especially in terms of their specificity and the relationship between money and time. I wanted to see if I could make just a few changes to this method in order to develop something that could work with poor households in Western Kenya who were using mobile money frequently. So in this project, I'm working with 20 women to create a kind of financial diary. I'm making a couple of changes in the way I'm collecting the information. First, rather than focusing on the household, I'm focusing on the social network of each woman and how it changes over time. And this will allow me to examine the way her social role in this network changes, as well as the flows of money in and out. I'm including not just cash money, but mobile money and in-kind gifts and transfers in the network, which I've discovered are also extremely common. We initiated the visiting in December, and we're visiting each woman every 2 weeks. This lady, pictured here, owns a school. She lives with her husband, who's a retired policeman. She's one of the more affluent women in our sample. Our women range in age from 23 to 74. Most combine farming with a variety of entrepreneurial activities. We have women who own small businesses. This lady owns her own beauty saloon, as they call them in Kenya. She wanted us to show a photograph of her new car, which she just purchased using partly from her business. According to 2009 government statistics, only 1% of households in Bungoma County own a car. I think that might be a little bit low, but we have captured the 1% with our small sample of 20 people. Most of the women in our sample make a living either partly or totally from farming. Visiting them involves a fair amount of traveling and a fair amount of discipline. These women are very busy. Most of the time, they are not home. So, Gabriel Kunyu has been helping us to conduct these surveys as we anxiously wait for the semester to finish so that we can go and join him here. To give you another example, this is Robai. She's a 72-year-old potter. She is a widow and senior wife out of 4 wives. She lives in Butuyu village, located about 4 kilometers from Kimilili town. She's about 500 meters from the nearest M-Pesa agent, and so she is able to cash in and out very often and uses M-Pesa quite a bit to support the costs of her business as a potter as well as her household needs. Her household includes her 2 daughters, son, and many grandchildren, and she felt that her household included 34 people. So this is a view of her home on the left and a map of her household on the right. So notice she has her home towards the left edge of that graph, her husband's house down below, and then her 2 co-wives' houses at the other end of the graph. So these households, especially in this area, really don't connote the same kind of social or economic grouping that we might assume in the West. There's really no word for family or household in the local language. There are several social groupings that actually mean much larger groups of people than we might expect. One could use the word mungo, which refers to the household, except this means if you're a man, it might refer to your entire extended family household and all your wives, but if you are a woman, it just refers to your particular home and your own children. So even with the genders, these different words for family don't really gloss to our idea of household. So we began simply asking how many people live in this house, like this physical structure. Even then, we struggle to really avoid these communicative blunders that come trying to translate words. And I just use that as an example of the difficulty that comes in doing this kind of survey work when you might have one particular idea of what a nuclear family group is, but it really doesn't fit in this particular area. Anyway. So we've tried to be more sensitive to that. Financial tools, digital financial tools, are very commonly used in this area in spite of its rural setting. I have divided these into group versus independent strategies just to try to get at some of the tensions between individual and group, between the self and the social network, that seem to me very, very important in how people use and make decisions about mobile money and money in general. So I'm recording things like savings group participation, use of a group pooling tool called Mchanga, which is a really interesting new way of using mobile money to fundraise. Pooling by siblings, and just the reciprocal money transfer service. I'm also looking at how people load and unload value, how they store value on their account, what kinds of earmarking do they do with their mobile money account, do they use a microfinance product such as Mshwari, which is a small loans available over the phone, and do they use a bill payment service. All the women in our sample use M-Pesa and sometimes other digital financial tools regularly. So I'm still experimenting with Yang of Northwestern University in terms of how these networks might actually look and be drawn. So this is Robai's network. Each circle represents what I've recorded on one visit, and the visits are happening every 2 weeks. So, and we've collected a lot of information, and so I've had to collapse the categories, and I've used my own categories here. So Robai is at the center of this kind of star graph. The costs of her household, I've designated those as the triangle, the red triangle. Her potting business, both in and out flows of money around that, I've done in green. She also gives people pots as gifts and as ways of reconciling debts, and so I've included that as in-kind transfers here. And then her participation in her social network, including the buying of airtime, is denoted in blue here. She also has a secret place where she saves money, and so I've documented coming in and out of that. On the bottom with the histograms, I've tried to capture the kind of quantitative portion of this. So if you look at the dark blue, it's incoming money. The purple is outgoing money or in-kind gifts or mobile money or cash. And the balance is in red there between what comes in and what comes out. So she actually has had a negative balance throughout these 4 2-week intervals. And what I've also done is use the social network analysis to tell me about the centrality of her node in her social network. So if you look at the light blue histogram on the left there, it measures the importance of her node within her network. So she starts out with relatively low centrality in the beginning, because there aren't many flows in and out. But as these flows in and out become more numerous, then her social capital, the centrality of her node, increases. So really what I'm able to do using this method is to examine how her economic capital might get traded out or exchanged for social capital, so that as her outgoing balance increases and her negative money balance increases, her social capital has actually increased. So I'm trying to find a way to place the economic value and the social value of these practices on an even keel, and to look at them in this commensurate way, and to capture the idea that as people send money out, while they may experience an economic loss, there is often a social gain. Many women experience satisfaction and even prestige from sending out to others, from helping them. Many women, for example, would like to be known as the most generous woman in their church. And so I'm trying to capture this social dimension of this, and at the same time as the economic one, by using the social network analysis. This is Brenda, another lady, just to show you that she's using more financial tools than Robai is. She has an M-Shwari loan in purple on the left there, which she did not yet pay back. She also has a loan from her MFI, which she has repaid using M-Pesa in this one here. And again, her social capital as well as her economic capital, any trade-offs she may be making there, are also visible by comparing the different histograms on the bottom. Okay, she is a beer brewer, and so unlike the potting in green, I've done her beer brewing and all of the costs and activities related to that in green here. And she also uses a secret place. Okay, so to summarize then, the traditional financial diary method uses currency money. I've tried to add other sources to that. I've tried to use not the household, but rather the social network around one woman, both that she produces with her mobile phone as well as her face-to-face interactions with people who are close to her and important to her. In addition to looking at income expenses, I'm also drawing the sociogram and looking for changes over time in the pattern of the money sending. For example, is there a centripetal pattern where a lot of money sent out versus a centrifugal pattern with a lot of money coming in and different times of the year, for example? And finally, rather than just looking at the economic balance sheet, I'm also trying to look at the social capital and the strategies that women might enact around both of those goals, both the social goal and the economic goal. Okay. By measuring social and economic capital, I seek to place the social and economic dimensions of money on equal footing in this study. As M-Pesa becomes commonly used, and because of other social changes, households are becoming more and more embedded in social relationships. Financial diaries have always included a more qualitative component, but in my opinion and my reading, it seems to me that this qualitative component has become more ethnographic over time. Nevertheless, the balance sheet approach often means that social networks are characterized chiefly in terms of their economic dimension. For example, the social network is praised when it amasses a lot of money, but it may be characterized as too slow or somehow falling short when it does not. The idea being that with those shortcomings of the social network identified, then a new financial product could be designed to fill that gap. And while these shortcomings may be true, and while this economic perspective is certainly important, we still know very little about the internal logics and the local understandings of these networks and the strategies women use to participate in them. Finally, and I would like to thank Ursula Dallinghouse of IMTFI for helping me think through these issues. Financial diaries ask a great deal of the participants. As Ananya Roy has written, they may reveal as much or more about what she has called the contradictions of bottom billion capitalism. For this reason and others, perhaps we should seek a better balance between the subject's point of view and our own. And that is our effort in this particular project. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jude, Kenechi, Onyima, and I work with Chinedu Bunike on this topic, generational tension in the uptake of DFX between adolescent girls and adults in Nigeria. And we embark on this study because of the outcome of the project we did 2 years ago for IMTFI. Last 2 years, we studied mobile money and women. And we discovered one important thing in that study, that among adult women, awareness was low, but uptake was higher. But among adolescent girls, awareness was very, very high, up to 76%, but uptake was very low. So we now delve into trying to answer the question, why is it that those who have awareness do not adopt the innovations? And we discovered also that major roadblock to adoption among adult women was the issue of trust and the issue of awareness. But among adolescent girls, it was not about trust, it was about the attitude of the adults towards their adoption. So that's why we embark on this study to understand actually the tension between adults and adolescent girls with regard to uptake of digital financial services. Adolescent girls here, we are looking at those at early adolescence and those at late adolescence. Ordinarily, adolescent girls' adult relationship is marked with tensions about finance, about behavior, about relationships. But the issue is now complex due to digital revolution. Because due to revolution, there's kind of shift in knowledge. Knowledge possessed by adults can now be possessed by a teenager. So adults find it difficult to inculcate their principles, their habits, their knowledge to the younger generation who felt that they now know more than the adults. So that kind of tension and friction, we also believe help in habit formation. Adults on their own are very conservative about adolescent girls' uptake of financial services. They have some reasons. And adolescent girls on their own do not want to accept the opinion of the adults. So that's why the tension continues to build up. We embark on this study because in Nigeria, we have more than 32 million adolescent girls. And there's difference in their uptake compared with women. There's about 25% decrease in their uptake. And we assume that, before we embark on the study, that the reason was that their peculiar characteristics were not considered by DFS operators. These adolescent girls are more open to innovations. They are more flexible to rigidities. But they were lumped together by DFS operators, resulting to lower uptake. And why it's important to embark on this study is that these adult girls are tomorrow's mothers, and the longevity of these innovations depend on their attitude today. In African setting, women and girls are seen as harbingers of knowledge that will impact on the next generation. So in this study, we looked at the intrigue that characterized adolescent girls' adult relationship with regard to uptake of DFS. We looked at the different perception of the two parties now. We looked at the tension that result from their different perception. And then we looked at the new social behavior in terms of the gifting, the rules and network that evolved due to the uptake. Okay, we looked at 4 communities, two from Islamic background and 2 from Christian background. That is the northern and southern part of Nigeria. And we worked with 120 adolescent girls. Some of them are still in school, some are still working. We used a number of methods to be able to gather the information we needed. We used questionnaire. We used school debate to capture the tension and the opposing views. We also use focal discussion method to capture contextual meaning of the issue. We designed the study such that we'll be able to compare Christian-Muslim perspective, adolescent girls perspective, and then traditional and modern culture perspective. Please give me some minute. I want to show you a minute video on why some adults are not comfortable with adolescent girls' uptake of these financial services. Okay, the audio is not loud enough. What happened here was the guy was asking the girl out on a date.
Understand. My mom is going to Italy. She finds out that anything for the relationship. I'm sorry, I cannot.
Okay, about that, I got to like working. I don't know if it's good or it's a symbol of my love for you.
Is this for me?
Yeah, for you. I got it for you.
Like seriously?
Yes,
You
yes.
fall? Oh my god, I'm so happy! Yes, yes, say yes!
It changed the whole dynamics.
I told you before, I'm not interested.
Okay, so if you look at what happened here, the guy was asking the girl out on a date, but the girl was not interested, and the guy knew the clue. He went and bought a mobile phone, and the whole story changed. And this is one of the reasons why adults are not comfortable with adolescent girls and use of phone. They feel that they are gullible, they are vulnerable, and many people can take advantage of them. Okay, we looked at digital profile of adolescent girls in Nigeria. 70% of them own both feature phone and smartphone. And we made an interesting discovery too. 78% of the smartphone they use were not bought by relatives or by parents, but by boyfriends. As part of birthday gifts or Lovers' Day gifts. Adolescent girls use their mobile phone basically for fun, for peer-based learning, for networking, and occasionally for financial transactions. And adults on their own are very much annoyed with adolescent girls' use of phone for these major reasons: the time spent with the phone, for financial reasons, and for relationship with unapproved males. We also discovered that 62% of adolescents cannot stay for more than 24 hours without their smartphone. And they spend close to 4.5 hours daily on their mobile phone. We discovered that in homes where you have adolescents and adults, phone-related quarrels occur every 72 hours. And adults on their own insist on the policy of no smartphone for early adolescents. And for late adolescents, they can give them phone, but with monitoring. Okay, these are some of the reasons why adults are not comfortable with adolescent girls' use of phone. It leads to poor interpersonal relationship. We observe, according to some parents and adults, that when girls have access to digital innovations, it alienates them from the community, from their parents, and they talk more with strangers more than with their relatives. And that is what taking place there. It can lead to traffic accidents, road accidents, because some of these girls on the way could be using the phone, and it could lead to distraction. The adolescent girl here was asked to look after a shop, and she was busy working with the phone instead of doing what she was asked to do. It's one of the reasons why some adults are not comfortable with adolescent girls' use of mobile phone. This is another reason: can increase flirting. That was a young girl and the boyfriend out there in the bush, and it can also lead to secretive lifestyle. The girl had to sneak inside the bush to be able to make call. And the last here was, it can lead to abandonment of house chores. The young girl was asked to prepare meal for the family. She could not even cover the pot. She could not even arrange the cooking stove well. She was busy with the phone. So when adults see this, they become uncomfortable with allowing adolescent girls to use digital financial services. And girls on their own have their reasons. They said they have to be part of the global community. They said they need to identify with peers, and they also need to enjoy themselves. And that is how the tension begins. Adults say, we don't want you to do this. Adolescent girls say, no, we must do this because this is our time. The reason adults classified into three: they have social reasons, family reasons, and health reasons. From their perspective, if you grant the young girls access to digital innovations, it can increase pressure from opposite sex. They can be cajoled into unwholesome behavior. It can lead to poor interpersonal relationship, especially with relatives. It can also lead to distraction from academic activities. And these are classified under social reasons. Under family reasons, they can abandon house chores. There could be conflicting moral values. We also observe that young girls that have access to smartphones have higher tendency to tell lies. And there's also conflict with family members. And also the need to get money to buy data bundle. There are also health reasons there. So when we looked at the DFS profile for adolescent girls, we discovered that 86% that use DFS were introduced to it by their peers and boyfriends and online friends. Only 3% agree that their parents or the adults, close adults, encourage them to adopt the innovation. 23% own bank account, and we also discovered that 76% of these girls have heard about DFS, but only 6% are using it. They use DFS to buy airtime, to receive gifts, to check balances, and to make payment. Adults on their own are not really comfortable with adolescent girls' uptake of DFS. They are reserved about it. They feel threatened. They feel perplexed, and some have also resigned to fate that we cannot fight this. Let's allow them. Their reasons were that the girls are still vulnerable, they're still gullible, and that uptake will make it difficult to inculcate financial discipline on them, and majorly that it can give them access to unwelcome relationship with opposite sex. So look at the tension here, and the arguments and the counter-arguments, the antics and the maneuvering. Adults on their own argue that you can give them feature phones to use, but for smartphone, they have to be up to 18 years. Adolescent girls on their own argue that even adults too need to be regulated in the way they use phone, the time and the places. Adults agree that because access to digital technology can give them, it can increase the tendency for them to go into unwholesome behavior, that they can bump into them unexpectedly to discover some mischievous act. And girls on their own said, we will not let them know that we even own smartphones. If we want to use them, we can sneak out to use the smartphone. Adults on their own insist that any smartphone not purchased by adult relative should be confiscated. And girls have their own way out. Girls said they are jealous because our friends bought what they were unable to buy for them. Young girls see it as a right violation and jealousy. Adults said that young girls can only use the phones when they meet their maturity criteria. And young girls said they cannot wait for eternity before they join the global community. Adults, even at some point, said, if you must perform these services, come and use our own smartphone. And girls also have their own way of maneuvering. They said they've learned to make their phone difficult for them to use. And when this phone is assumed to be spoiled, the girls will not appropriate the phone and use the phone, free from their own monitoring. Adults insist that if we must give them access to phone, it must be for specific services, to specific sites, and we must monitor them. And the girls on their own said they know how to cover up their tracks. And not only that, that they will not even ask them for money to buy data bundle. So we also looked at the effects of DFS uptake among adolescents. We discovered that it has really redefined opposite sex relationship, the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. Now it makes it more complex, makes it more demanding and difficult to monitor. We discovered that it increases secretive lifestyle, it weakens communication with relatives, and increases adolescent girls' interaction with strangers. It has also changed the nature of gifts. Usually, boyfriends buy gifts like physical gifts like clothes for the girlfriend, but DFS update has changed it all. The gift has changed to airtime and data bundle, digital money, online purchases, customized gift, videos, and electronic gadgets. For one of the axioms we have over there in Nigeria is when a young guy talks to a girl, asks her out on a date, the first thing she will say is, if you love me, buy a smartphone for me. So purchase of smartphone has become kind of a culture that is evolving among adolescent girls. We also discovered it has increased the rate of flirting, a tendency to tell lies, and materiality among girls. This also validates some of the perception of the adults concerning adolescent girls and use of digital technologies. However, we discovered that it has increased the financial literacy of adolescent girls. It has reduced the number of times they visit banks. It has also changed their payment pattern and increased the financial autonomy of these girls. So from a study in the field, we realized that adults are not comfortable with digital revolution. They shy away from preparing the girls for the responsibility of the digital age, and the girls are not really comfortable with that. The girls on their own try to struggle to meet up with the challenges, and in the bid to meet up, they end up messing themselves up. It was also shocking that some educated adults are still uncomfortable with adolescent girls' use of DFS. We also discovered that highly religious people are also threatened. They are more threatened by the uptake. We compared Christian girls with Muslim girls, and we discovered that Christian girls have more chances of uptake than Muslim girls, but you have more tension in Christian homes than in Muslim homes concerning these girls and the uptake. We also discovered that this argument and counter-argument between adults and adolescent girls about uptake were not considered by DFS operators in designing the products and in designing the marketing message and awareness. And we also discovered that this tension is a serious roadblock because only 3% of adults encourage their young girls to go for the innovations. And this is because of the kind of information adults have concerning DFS. Majority of the awareness they have is about the negative effects of digital technology, and as a result, they view innovation with a lot of suspicion. So when we get back home, we conduct group discussion to generate views on the community. We also plan to interview DFS operators to get their own view. And then we also want to conduct investigation on some cases where the adolescent girls' tension have gone into crisis. And then we prepare our research report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. That was incredible. So I know we're going to have time for conversation and to invite everyone to bring your questions forward. I have one if we can start with, just to kind of think across the three different areas of focus. One of the things that was resonant, or many things, but one of the things that first resonated with me, and I'd love you all to think about within your own project and then what you are noticing across the projects as you listen to each other, how there are now new or shifts in social dynamics taking place. And I think some of you spoke to this directly, but in terms of really emerging from the intersection of using technology or new financial products in this space of personal banking, in terms of how that implicates or has effects in terms of relating to community, in terms of relating to family, and the implications of layering culture and relationships over access for personal finance, and then how you relate and access that finance. So.
Okay, well, I'm not really sure about the question in relation to my research, but maybe I can speak to the increase in financial autonomy of women who migrate, and the kinds of tensions that generate. Well, okay, I'm not sure what to say, but I think that despite all these moral judgments about how women earn and use their money, there is certainly some evidence that, well, there are some women who don't care. They're like, I don't give a shit what you think, sorry. I don't really care what you think. I'm just gonna do it my way. And so over time, if enough women perform those acts of resistance, I think that there might be more acceptance of women-headed households, less, discrimination against single parenting, divorce, and these issues. But it takes a lot of time because there's a lot of cultural backlash against it. And also there are many cases of ambiguity where women may be perceived as immoral if they, get divorced and do all sorts of other things. But if they have houses to show for it, if they still perform their duties as mothers, the ambiguity, I think, is key to where social change happens, that people are undecided. Okay, she divorced her husband, she's leaving her children to migrate abroad because she said, I want to. I don't care what you think, but I want to, and this is my decision. And yet, people do see that her children receive good education, they have houses. So it's this ambiguity where they can't really say for sure how to judge her morally within their frameworks that is key to changing how people perceive women's financial autonomy and which affects their social autonomy in other ways. Yeah, I hope that helps.
I think that was an excellent point. And in my area too, there's been a very, very rapid social change in the past few decades. The focus on adolescence is really important because we have women who range in age from 23 to 74, and it's very, very different. Some of these moral frameworks around money, around whether women really, perceive their responsibilities to others as more important than their perhaps accumulative kind of desires. I think all of this is very much in flux in a place like Western Kenya, and you see it in terms of the very different strategies and ways that women of different ages or different educational levels really look at the relationship between themselves, the people in their families, their money. So I think that ambiguity is really an important thing to point out. And I do think we maybe tend to think of these potential customers as individual people, and I think women really see themselves as a sociocentric self, and their relationships are very important. And so that's, I think, the other thing that I would add. But I think this is where
Okay, thank you. For adolescent girls and women, there's a future. The trend is going up. People are interested. The awareness is increasing, but there are some roadblocks to be addressed, especially being able to see adolescent girls as a different market from adult women. That has been the mistake some people have been making, lumping adolescent girls with women as the same market. They should be seen as different markets. The girls have different capability. We are able to classify them into two generations, the pre-digital revolution generation and the post-digital revolution generation. Their thinking is not really the same. These girls are more open to technologies, more open to innovations, more open to new way of doing things. And adults on their own are still holding on to the ancient maxim that this is my girl, I need to teach her my way, she needs to understand our culture, our practices. And the tension is there, and the tension is going to continue. But we need to support the girls by not just spreading awareness, but letting the adults to understand the changes the revolution has caused. And then building trust, because we also see that trust is indirectly going to affect adolescent girls. If adults on their own develop trust on these innovations and begin to use them, there's high tendency that they will open up to these girls. And they also see their girls as still teenagers, still things that they have to protect, they have to guard from unwholesome behavior. Some of them, one of the reasons one of them gave us is that if they have access to these innovations, it will be difficult to inculcate in her financial discipline. So they find difficult to understand how these innovations can help those girls to achieve financial discipline. It's difficult for them. And also, the information coming across to the adults are more about the negative effects of these innovations. But if there's awareness on the positive effects, they will start viewing it with suspicion and with feeling that this might be good for adults, but not for young people. Their mind is still fragile. They could be easily corrupted. Thank you.
Jude, I have a question for you on that point. Do you find that in the same kind of family settings where there's distrust for the young girls' access or use, are adults taking up the technology, or are you finding that there's, for adults that in families that are not taking it up, that there's greater disquiet or kind of concern there, or that there's a difference?
Okay, we even discovered that in some families where adults are using them, they're not comfortable with adolescent girls using them. In fact, it is easier for adolescent girls from homes where they're not using it to adopt innovation than for homes where they are using it. So some adults from where from whom some adults using the services are not really comfortable with their own young girls using the service.
Okay, interesting. Do we have questions? Okay, great. How do we?
Hi, good morning. Thanks a lot for this very exciting presentation and case studies. I have a question for, Jude. You're talking about adults, but who have you been interviewing? I mean, women, the mothers, fathers. Can you talk a little bit about the who is behind those adults who are? Yeah, if you can elaborate a little bit more. And if the discourse is the same, if you consider young boys, teenage boys, if the discourse is similar. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the adults we studied included their parents, their guardians, their uncles, and their aunts. We also extended it to some elites in the community who could influence the decision-making process of these people. These are the adults we look at. Okay, in African culture, sometimes the way they see adolescent girls is not the way they see adolescent boys. So the attention was not much on boys. Adolescent boys are free to use the services, but for girls, attention was more on the girls that exposure to such innovations could spoil the girl's child. So we explored that too, but the tension was not high when it comes to adolescent boys. It was more on adolescent girls. They want to protect adolescent girls more.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. But the boys are the ones spending a lot of money on buying phones for girls, but their parents have don't have an issue with it.
Not really. Most of the guys trying to date adolescent girls are not adolescents. Many of them are more of adults.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Sonia Renasa from the Better Than Cash Alliance. And thanks for the excellent presentations. My question goes to Jude. I was wondering, you segmented the group with adolescents between 15 years and that could go up to 20. So I was wondering, is it about the use of digital financial services or the uptake of new technologies? Because cash is still king in Nigeria, and I was wondering the kind of like services or those digital financial services that a girl that's like 15 years old could do if they can open a bank account, or are we talking about the possibility of saving money by using phones or paying utility bills on behalf of adults, etc. So I was wondering if you could maybe detail a little bit about the kind of like digital financial services that we are talking about, or if it's just about the uptake and use of technologies that could segue to DFS in the future. Thanks.
Okay, we considered uptake of mobile money, other online payment platforms, and then banks' mobile app, the mobile application of some banks. These are the three ones we focus attention on, and these are the things that were common in Nigeria: mobile money, online payment platforms, and banks' mobile app.
Thank you so much, Nina Bandel, sociology here at UCI. I appreciated all these presentations, and I do think they have the idea of gender norms very much in common. So I would like you all three to reflect a little bit about how does that influence your findings, your projects, how gender norms may change over time. I'm just thinking for Carol, this idea of inherent tension about women as providers by leaving to earn money, right? Men should leave to earn money, and who does the judging? Is it both females and males. And then for Sibel, I caught this notion of generosity, right? Women want to be known as the most generous, but could this be more true for older women, transitioning to then Jude's talking about adolescent girls? It seems to me also that the idea of sexual promiscuity of young girls is really central to what you're finding. There's some additional research that actually points to this gift giving by older men to younger women and what consequences that has for broader, in this case, the research I'm referring to by a sociologist is on health and public health and AIDS transmission, sexual transmitted diseases. So this idea of, girls and how do we empower them or disempower them. So I'd like you to reflect a little bit on that if possible. Not too long because there are many questions that other people want to ask. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I think that's very true. I think age is very important, and a woman's position in the life course is very important. And in the previous project, I also showed that it was often older women who were sending out. Sometimes a younger woman or a niece would be central in a network that included her mother and her mother's siblings, for example. And so I think that a younger woman is often invested in, and so as she goes through the life course, she might transition to then, paying back, if you will. And I think this is really important, and this should be considered, absolutely. And just the other thing is that because of the tradition of polygynous marriage here, many women do think of themselves as economically independent to a great extent. And so I think that actually fits in with the use of DFS and perhaps even the popularity of these services in this area, that women are used to making these financial decisions historically. And so it's not a recent thing that they've been empowered or anything like that.
Just to add to that, which I didn't say in my presentation, the life cycle of women is really important here. So what I call the moral risks of women migrating reduces over time. So for example, if a woman's past childbearing age, if she's past 50 specifically, people are not really gossiping about what she's doing overseas, why she's not coming back to visit her children. So that definitely reduces over time, and the focus is a lot on younger girls. But I actually find there's a lot of diversity, and that's part of my difficulty in that although people may say standard things about gendered norms, that is not reflected in practice. In practice, a lot of women are also pressurized to go abroad. So I think, this is something in common when we talk about gender, these different double expectations. So women are expected to be good daughters, to go abroad and send money back, but there are so many conditions attached to that. And so that's what's interesting. And I didn't mention this, but I think that there's a difference in how men and women migrate. So part of what influenced the popularity of women's migration, despite all the earlier kind of discourses against women migrating, is that recruitment agents would go to villages and pay parents money up front for their daughter to migrate. So that is a really big factor in influencing the popularity. But this also means that women take individual responsibility to repay their debts. So they embark on debts to their recruitment agents, and then they are just alone laboring in households in foreign countries to repay that debt no matter what happens. Whereas men have to pay a lot of money before they migrate, and often this means that they're borrowing from neighbors, friends. So it's kind of a shared risk. So I think that really influences the way people judge women's morality, because it's all on you if you fail or succeed. Whereas men, it's more, that doesn't really happen, and if something bad happens, they're deported. The situation is just not is not the same. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the girl child is seen as an asset in African culture. In most African culture, people don't joke with marriage. In fact, in our last study, 2014 study, one of the ways through which families store wealth is through the girl child. You train the girl child, groom the girl child as a way of you're storing wealth that when she gets married tomorrow, it's you're trying to reap from where you sowed. So they are very, very cautious about what the adolescent girl becomes in the future. They try to ward off traitors, men and other people from coming in to spoil the girl. in quotes. And because of that ideology, any innovation coming in is viewed with suspicion, whether this is going to help the girl or not. Initially, we were thinking it's about education, it's about awareness. But we discovered that even educated people are not really comfortable with the adolescent girls having access to that. They gave a number of reasons, ranging from social reason to economic reason, and then the issue of distraction. But one lingering issue there was that it would be difficult to inculcate financial discipline among these girls in their own way. But in our own experiment, we also discovered that use of DFS can also inculcate the discipline they're talking about among the girls. Ordinarily in African culture, girls are expected to be submissive and not show to know more than the elders. So they're expected to learn from their mothers, which means that any wisdom not coming from the mother is viewed with suspicion. And mothers on their own expect that I'm not doing this, so you shouldn't do this. Or even if I am doing this, you've not come of age to do that. So it's really complex. But with awareness, issue of trust, and increase in adoption, the tension will be reduced. Thank you.
Thank you for 3 very interesting presentations. I have 3 or 4 points which I think would be important. The first one is the question of translation, which I think would be important to reflect on in all 3 of your presentations, because you are dealing with certain concepts which I think might be taken for granted. For example, how is money understood? Like I got from one of the projects that you couldn't translate family, for example, but you could translate money, which I found very interesting, because if you could not translate family, I think you also couldn't translate money. So it'll be interesting to reflect on some of these concepts. You know, what's the value and what are the consequences of employing some of these concepts without reflecting on the kinds of tensions which they create when you do your research. That leads to the other conceptual issues, which is about gender, because like one of the other speakers mentioned, I think it's something which you take for granted, because you seem not to consider men as gendered in your project, which I find very fascinating, because you seem to fall in the same trap again. So what is the value of considering men as gendered, and what would it mean? Because I think that sometimes, for example, in Carol's project about notions of success, the way men mock other men is very different from the way they're mocked in public. So considering them as gendered might shift many things in all of your project. And I think, Jude, it will be important to compare how boys also use this in order to understand how girls use it. And I think comparison is also very, very useful. How do you place this within a global context? Because placing it, I think, in a global context will help us to understand how unique your project is. It would be useful maybe to look at those issues. And then, Jude, in your project, I think you're dealing with 2 things, age and gender, which are often treated as separate. So it would be very important to reflect how these 2 intersect within a specific context. Some people think, especially in African context, we should privilege age over gender, and others think that we should privilege gender over age. So it will be important to reflect on how these 2 intersect in your project to understand that. Thank you.
Does anybody, do you want to comment?
Thank you. I think your comment about gender is very, very important. Due to time, I could only focus on women, but in my bigger project, I also look at men. And you're right, I feel that, well, men might have, at least in my context, have more space to negotiate while not bringing money home and having more access to cultural reasons for why they didn't. I think that, like you said, the mockery of men can also be more extreme. So what I found was more extreme cases where men resorted to violence or suicide because the shame they experienced was so great, because the expectations of being breadwinners is also much higher than women. So I think there are more extreme cases, but I found that the majority of them, for example, men have more resources to say, well, I don't really care, and they are excused, while women are across the board more, the burden just falls on them. But I think that you're right too, that we shouldn't, gender is about men and women, and masculinity and femininity, and that's really important. Thank you for your comments.
Yes, thank you. I agree. These are important points. In terms of money, what I've done is, rather than just using cash money, which is what a lot of financial diaries have done, I've used this monetary ecology approach, which is what IMTFI has recommended in their design principles document, so that the drawings that I showed include not just cash money, M-Pesa, loans. It includes gifts women give or receive, plants. I've discovered many of the women give each other food plants. Rubai gives out pots, as I mentioned, as a kind of money. So I am definitely including that, and I think that's very important. And the network approach, what is interesting about it is that by showing men and women on a graph, I can show the kind of role that they play in terms of gender. For example, many of the networks are focused on matrilineal ties, so that but men will play equal roles. They will be equally represented on those graphs, but a man is more likely to be mother's brother than to be a father. So to show that relational self as through the mother is important, and in this setting is associated with sort of warm emotional tie of closeness to the sister's son, which is well documented in anthropology. So a man is more likely to show that matrilineal relational self rather than to be a father. Although I do have some fathers on the graph, like I showed Edward at the beginning. So I think those are really, really important, and we should look at the intersection of all these kinds of identities and the way that they influence all these financial phenomena. I think is really, really important. I think it's very important.
Okay, so your comment is noted. We also intend to compare the attitude of young adults and aged adults, Christian adults and Muslim adults, adults that are in rural area and adults that are in urban slums. So it's going to be considered. We also want to consider split the adolescent into two, late adolescent and early adolescent. So the issue of age and gender is to be noted. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Oh. Okay.
Okay, just very quickly then, I just have a question for Sibel, a methods question. So I find it fascinating that you take this financial diaries approach and try to apply it then to social networks and away from the household. So I was hoping you can elaborate a bit more about maybe some of the strengths or maybe some of the limitations that you've come across by applying that method in that way, because I find it very interesting. And just a very minor question to Jude. In your last slide, you mentioned that uptake among Christians were likely to be higher than with Muslims. Can you provide a little insight as to why that is?
Okay. We discovered that among Christian girls, the awareness was higher. It was about 78% awareness, and uptake was about 7%. But among Muslim environment, awareness was lower, about 66%, and the uptake was about 4%. So we felt that it could be because of the Christian approach to issues and Islamic approach to Western innovations. So in our further study, before we conclude the study, we delve deeper to know the reasons why it's like that. But preliminary findings shows that Christians have higher chances of uptake than Muslim girls.
There are a lot of challenges. I think one thing, trying to include everything is very hard because of recall issues, and I think Russell Barnard, I don't remember his name, but he writes in his anthropological methods book about half of what people actually do is stuff that they can remember and tell you. And so, a lot of it is being missed. And by trying to include everything, of course, I'm probably missing even more. I'm not quite sure how you would correct that. And I also had trouble because for each week you get a huge list of things, and then I had to figure out how to collapse them because when Yang did the first graphs, they were so busy you couldn't see a thing. And so then I had to figure out how to categorize things. So then I ended up using my own categories, and I thought, well, should I really use their categories? And so, you just, there's so many, I still haven't really figured out the best way of drawing these. I know that like Richard Wilk did some work in Mexico where he had people make their own categories. And so that maybe is something that I should go back and ask people about. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of issues, whether it's their point of view or your analysis, and then this issue of recall. I think it's the more things you want to include, the harder it is. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna wrap up. So I want to thank Carol and Sibel and Jude for incredible and very thoughtful presentations and work. I'm looking forward to the next go round when all these are things that I'm sure will continue to be on your minds. But I'm interested also what questions are further provoked. As you go forward, I think that's one of the most exciting things as we get to explore certain areas, what grows out of that even further. So if we can give them a thank you for starting us off so well.